The Relationship Management Process, Part 4. In Part 3 of Relationship Management, we looked at two paths that the decision could take, avoidance and aggressive. In Part 4, we'll look at the consequences of these two paths. When we left off in Part 3, we were talking about feeling threatened by the reaction that may result if you confront the issue. We asked the question, why do I feel threatened? Was it something you did or did not do? Or something that another did? Is it irrational thinking? Most of the time, it is irrational thinking. What is behind the irrational thinking? Is it fear? Fear is the first emotion that Adam displayed. In Genesis 3:10, he answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, so I hid. Adam was the first person to be conflict avoidant. He continued the avoidance in Genesis 3:12. The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Adam avoided his responsibility and blamed Eve. He not only blamed Eve, he was blaming God. He was saying, hey, it's not my fault, God. It's your fault. If you'd not given the woman to me, we'd not be in this mess. Man has been blaming others for their actions ever since. When our conscience convicts us of having done something wrong, we try and relieve the guilt by blaming others. There is one more area that may cause you to avoid the issue, that of feeling inferior. If we are trusting God's word for direction, then we must consider Psalms 139, verses 13 and 14. It says, You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit them together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. It's an amazing thing to think about. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. Remember, God does not make junk. What happens if you do not take the steps of action to correct avoidance? You will travel farther down the avoidance path, resulting in the following. Avoidance leads to gunny sacking. That is, you take all the hurt feelings, all the frustrations, and you keep them in a gunny sack to be carried as you go through life. Or you may start your own family zoo. Oh, we don't talk about that. The reason they call it a zoo, it's because each issue is like an animal that eats away at the relationship. Whether it is a gunny sacker or a zookeeper, there will be negative results. The family zoo will result in a passive relationship. You may want to go back to a point where you can express your ideas or thoughts openly, where you can have an open dialogue and exchange ideas without having to feel that you will be corrected or put down. Until you can clear the zoo of all the animals, that is, the unresolved issues, your relationship will become passive and withdrawn. You'll just quit trying to communicate and stay in the relationship with a poor me attitude. You may find yourself hiding behind a wall or living in your own cage, trying to protect yourself from others. The cage door is only shut when others get too close. Closing the door shuts out others and keeps you from feeling any more emotional hurt. This will make you a very unpleasant person to be around. Ever heard the phrase, he's always had a chip on his shoulder? Your body language tells others what kind of attitude is on the inside. In Dr. Bob Phillips' book, 42 Days to Feeling Great, he says that people who suffer in silence and hold it all pent up inside can become depressed, and angry because they have used up all their energy keeping track of the past pains and hurts. When the family zoo gets overcrowded, the relationships choose another path. The conflict avoidant person who has been suffering in silence can no longer take care of all the animals in the zoo. The past emotional pain and the hurts are too much. The zoo is full and can no longer hold any more. The cage door to the zoo has just broken open, and all the animals are headed straight for you. This quiet, mild-mannered person is now like the gunny sacker, who cannot put another issue in the sack. They both have reached their breaking point. All the emotional zoo animals are now out in the open, and the gunny sacker will empty his sack on the next person they meet. Talk about a disrupted expectation. This is no ordinary disrupted expectation. This is a full-on conflict, and it will turn into a crisis. This type B person has become a supercharged type A. In this charged state, there can be verbal abuse, physical abuse, and screaming that the neighbors can hear across the street. Just hope there are no small lamps or frying pans nearby. This is a classic case of domestic violence 101. They have switched from avoidance to aggressive. It has just taken the avoidant person a little longer to get to the crisis. And if you happen to be the one standing there, you are wondering, what happened? What did I say? What did I do? What you said or did is not important at this point. What happened is that the gunny sack and the zoo was full, and you were the last event that triggered it to be dumped. It was pent-up emotions that had to come out. You just happened to be in the fallout zone. You might call it going postal. Some people are walking time bombs just waiting to go off. You need to recognize that when this happens, you need to be a friend, not an adversary. If you react and attack, you will now be involved in a domestic violence case. The world is full of violence. Let's not go there. If you are prone to being a conflict avoidant person and you find yourself in a crisis, you need to ask for help. The longer you stay in a crisis mode, the greater the risk that somebody will quit and leave the relationship. You have seen the results of the avoidant path. We'll look at why the aggressive path ends in the same crisis as well. Have you ever met a person with what I call the big dog syndrome? That is, my dog is bigger than your dog. They'll tell you that they are smarter than you are, that they live in a more expensive house than you do. Everything they do is, I am the greatest. They are always comparing themselves to others. Some want to point out flaws in others to feel better about themselves. Others try and reassure themselves that they are doing well. 2 Corinthians 10:12 warns us about doing the same. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they're not wise. They know it all. Just ask them. This is the aggressive approach. They're not one to suffer in silence. They are the type A personality. If you're a type A, then you attack the issue head on. You tell it like it is. Question: did you overreact to another's action or lack of action? It reminds me of the cartoon by Johnny Hart. The aggressive person is trying to beat the answer out of them. Why are you beating up on that poor clam? I can't get him to open up. The avoidant person is the clam in this case. This may lead to verbal abuse and could be physical abuse also. The honeymoon is over. I win, you lose. Who do you think you are? What does the Bible say about this type of response? Isaiah 5:21. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Or Romans 12:3. Do not think of himself more highly than he ought to think. You want more? Romans 12:16. Be not wise in your own conceit. There are more verses, yet I think you get the point. Are you like the person in the book of Esther called Haman? Do you recall how he acted and what happened to him? If not, you should read chapters 5 and 7 of Esther to see what happened to this arrogant man. There are other reasons to limit your aggression. Proverbs 13:3 says, self-control means controlling the tongue. A quick retort can ruin everything. Proverbs 14:17 says, a short-tempered man is a fool. Proverbs 15:28 says, a good man thinks before he speaks. If you do not follow the instruction manual on relationships, you'll find that both the aggressive and the avoidant paths will eventually end up in the crisis stage. The longer you stay in a crisis mode, the greater the risk that someone will quit and leave the relationship. In Part 5, we'll look at the appropriate way to handle a disrupted expectation.